A newborn vanished from a hospital crib, swaddled in a blue blanket, gone without a trace in the dead of night. The mother's screams echoed through the sterile halls of St. Agnes Medical Center, a sound so raw it lingered in the memories of every nurse on duty. It was 2007, and the small town of Havenwood, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York, was not prepared for a mystery that would haunt it for nearly 2 decades. No ransom note, no witnesses, no leads, only a grainy security tape showing a shadowy figure slipping through a side exit, clutching something small to their chest. The case went cold, the headlines faded, but the wound remained open for those left behind. 18 years later, a weathered missing poster flutters on a community board across town, and a face eerily familiar stares back, unraveling secrets. Long buried in Havenwood's quiet streets, Leila Monroe was only 22 when her son Ethan disappeared. She'd been a single mother, barely out of college, working double shifts at a diner to afford the tiny apartment she'd hoped to make a home. The pregnancy had been unexpected, but Ethan was her anchor, her reason to keep going. She remembered the weight of him in her arms, his tiny fingers curling around hers, the way his eyes, blue like a summer sky, seemed to hold a promise of something greater. She'd only left him for an hour that night, exhausted from a 36-hour labor, trusting the nurses to watch over him while she slept. When she woke to the empty crib, her world shattered. The police had been kind at first, but their questions grew sharper as days turned to weeks. Did you have any enemies, Miss Monroe? Were you struggling financially? Did you ever consider giving him up? Lila's grief was dissected, her life laid bare. The town whispered some pitied her, others judged. A young, unmarried mother? Maybe she wasn't fit. Maybe she'd done something to her own child. The rumors clung to her like damp rot, and though she stayed in Havenwood, she became a ghost in her own life, working at the same diner, living in the same apartment, her days a blur of routine and regret. But by 2025, Leila was 40, her once bright, eyes dulled by years of unanswered questions. She still kept Ethan's baby blanket, folded neatly in a drawer, its blue fabric faded but untouched by time. Every year, on his birthday, she'd visit the hospital, standing outside the maternity ward, as if proximity might summon him back. The town had moved on, but Lila couldn't. She didn't know how. Across town, in a bustling coffee shop called The Daily Grind, 18-year-old Caleb Reed was wiping down tables, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He was a quiet kid, lanky and reserved, with a knack for blending into the background. Raised by his adoptive parents, Margaret and Thomas Reed, Caleb had grown up in a modest house on the edge of Havenwood, a life of routine and stability. But something always felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He'd never asked too many questions about his adoption. Margaret was tight-lipped, and Thomas, a retired mechanic, preferred silence over sentiment. Caleb had a birth certificate, but it was vague, listing no hospital, no biological parents. "You're ours," Margaret would say, her voice sharp, ending the conversation. Caleb wasn't one for trouble, but he was curious. He'd always been drawn to the community board outside the coffee shop, where locals pinned flyers for lost pets, yard sales, and missing persons. That morning, as he swept the sidewalk, his eyes caught on a new poster. It was weathered, as if it had been printed years ago, but someone had pinned it up fresh. Missing, Ethan Monroe, taken October 12, 2007. Below the text was a composite sketch of what Ethan might look like at 18, a digital rendering of a young man with sharp cheekbones, dark hair, and striking blue eyes. Caleb froze. The face staring back was his own. His heart thudded, a strange heat rising in his chest. He ripped the poster down, stuffing it into his apron pocket, and glanced around to see if anyone had noticed. The street was quiet, save for a delivery truck idling nearby. Caleb's mind raced. It couldn't be him. He was Caleb Reed, not Ethan Monroe. But those eyes, that jawline, it was like looking in a mirror. He slipped back into the coffee shop, his hands trembling as he poured coffee for a regular, Mrs. Delaney, who was prattling on about the weather. "You okay, hun?" Mrs. Delaney asked, her brow furrowing. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Caleb forced a smile. "Just tired," he mumbled, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed answers, but he didn't know where to start. Margaret and Thomas had always been cagey about his past, and now, with this poster burning a hole in his pocket, their silence felt like a lie. Detective Sarah Klein was nearing retirement, but the Ethan Monroe case was the one that kept her up at night. She'd been a rookie in 2007, assigned to the case when it was still hot. The hospital security was laughable back then. No cameras in the maternity ward, only one at the exit, and the footage was useless. The shadowy figure could have been anyone. A man, a woman, even a teenager in a hoodie. Sarah had interviewed everyone, nurses, janitors, even the hospital's security guard, who'd been half asleep that night. Lila Moreau had been her focus for a while, but Sarah's gut told her the mother was innocent. The real culprit was out there, and Sarah had spent 18 years chasing ghosts. Now, at 55, Sarah was a fixture at the Havenwood Police Department, her desk cluttered with case files and cold coffee. She'd never married, never had kids. Her work was her life, and Ethan's case was personal. She'd promised Lila she'd find him, a promise she'd failed to keep. When a call came in that morning from a librarian reporting a new missing poster with Ethan's name, Sarah's heart skipped. Someone was stirring the pot, and she didn't know why. She drove to the Daily Grind, where the librarian had seen the poster. The board was bare now, but the librarian, a wiry woman named Ellen, was certain of what she'd seen. It was Ethan Monroe's name, Ellen said, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might summon bad luck. The sketch looked so real, like it was based on someone. Sarah's jaw tightened. Composite sketches were guesses, but this one sounded too precise. She thanked Ellen and stepped outside, scanning the street. Havenwood was small, fewer than 10,000 people, and secrets didn't stay buried forever. Someone knew something. She just had to find them. Caleb couldn't focus for the rest of his shift. The poster was folded in his pocket, its weight heavier than it should have been. He kept replaying his life, searching for cracks. Margaret's overprotectiveness, Thomas's distance, the way they never talked about his adoption unless he pushed. He'd once found a locked box in their attic, but Margaret had caught him before he could open it, her face pale, her voice sharp. "That's private, Caleb. Don't go snooping." At home that evening, Caleb waited until Margaret was in the kitchen and Thomas was in the garage. He crept upstairs to his room, locking the door, and unfolded the poster. The details were sparse but chilling. Ethan Monroe, born October 10th, 2007. Taken from St. Agnes Medical Center. Mother, Lila Monroe. There was a number to call with tips, and Caleb's finger hovered over his phone. He wanted to dial it, but fear stopped him. What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't? He hid the poster under his mattress and tried to sleep, but his dreams were fractured flashes of a hospital. A woman's voice, calling a name he didn't recognize. A blue blanket. He woke in a sweat, his heart pounding. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He needed to know who Lila Monroe was. Lila was wiping down tables at the diner when a young man walked in, his hood up, his hands stuffed in his pockets. It was slow for a Tuesday, and she barely noticed him at first. He sat in a corner booth, ordered a coffee, and kept his head down. Something about him tugged at her, a familiarity she couldn't place. She chalked it up to exhaustion and brought him his Coffee, her smile automatic. You from around here? She asked, making small talk. The boy looked up, and Lila's breath caught. His eyes were blue, piercing, like Ethan's had been. She steadied herself against the table, her vision blurring. You okay, Mom? He asked, his voice soft but guarded. Yeah, she managed, forcing a laugh. Just déjà vu, I guess. He nodded, but his gaze lingered, as if he were studying her too. Lila walked away, her hands shaking. She didn't believe in coincidences, not after 18 years of hoping for a miracle. She slipped into the back, pretending to check inventory, and pulled out her phone. She still had Sarah Klein's number saved, a lifeline she hadn't used in years. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. What would she even say? I saw a boy who looks like Ethan? It sounded desperate, even to her. Caleb watched Lila disappear into the back of the diner, his pulse racing. He'd come to see her, to see if the woman from the poster felt real, but now he was rattled. The way she'd looked at him, it wasn't just surprise, it was recognition. He sipped his coffee, barely tasting it, and glanced around the diner. A trucker was. At the counter, a couple of teenagers in another booth. No one was watching him, but he felt exposed. He'd looked up Lila Monroe online before coming. There wasn't much, just old articles about the kidnapping. A few photos of a younger Lila, her face etched with grief. She looked different now. Older, worn down, but those eyes were the same. Caleb didn't know what he'd expected to feel, but this mix of hope and dread was overwhelming. He left a few bucks on the table and slipped out, his hood up. His mind a storm. Sarah Klein was at her desk when her phone buzzed. Lila's name flashed on the screen, and her stomach dropped. She answered on the first ring. Lila? What's wrong? Lila's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. I saw a boy today, Sarah, at the diner. He looked like Ethan, like the sketch on that poster. Sarah sat up straighter, her pen tapping against her desk. Describe him. Tall, dark hair, blue eyes, maybe 18. He was nervous, I think. Kept looking at me, like he knew me. Sarah's mind raced. It could be nothing, a kid who looked like the sketch, a coincidence. But her gut said otherwise. Did he say anything? A name, anything? No, Lila said. He just ordered coffee and left. Sarah, I know it sounds crazy, but I felt something. Like it was him. Sarah didn't dismiss her. She'd seen too many cases where instinct led to breakthroughs. I'm coming to the diner, she said. Don't go anywhere. At the Reed house, Margaret was chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements precise but tense. Thomas was in his recliner, a beer in hand, the TV droning. Caleb slipped in quietly, hoping to avoid questions, but Margaret's voice stopped him. Where were you today? Work, Caleb said too quickly. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You? Smell like coffee, but not from the grind. Where'd you go? Caleb's throat tightened. Just walked around. Needed air. She didn't push, but her gaze lingered, sharp and knowing. Caleb retreated to his room, his heart pounding. He pulled the poster from under his mattress and stared at it again. Ethan Monroe. The name felt foreign, but it stirred something deep, like a memory he couldn't grasp. He needed to talk to someone, but not his parents. Not yet. Sarah arrived at the diner just as the lunch rush was picking up. Lila was behind the counter, her face pale, her hands fidgeting with a rag. Sarah pulled her into the back, away from prying eyes. Tell me everything, she said. Lila recounted the encounter, her voice breaking as she described the boy's eyes. It was like looking at Ethan, Sarah. I know it's been 18 years, but I'd know him anywhere. Sarah nodded, jotting notes. I'm going to check the coffee shop again, See if anyone saw who put up that poster. And I'll pull the old case files. If this kid's in town, we'll find him." Lila grabbed her arm. "Sarah, what if it's him? What if he's been here all along?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. But as she left the diner, her mind was already piecing together possibilities. A boy who looked like Ethan. A poster that appeared out of nowhere. Someone was trying to send a message. She just had to figure out who. Caleb couldn't stay still. That night, he snuck out, his bike cutting through the quiet streets of Havenwood. He didn't know where he was going. Not exactly. But he ended up at St. Agnes Medical Center. The hospital loomed in the dark, its windows glowing faintly. He parked his bike and stared at the entrance, the poster's words echoing in his mind. Taken from St. Agnes Medical Center. He didn't know why he was here, only that he needed to be. A security guard noticed him, an older man with a tired face. "You okay, kid?" he called. Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, just thinking." The guard squinted at him, then shrugged and went back to his rounds. Caleb's eyes drifted to a plaque near the entrance, commemorating the hospitals. Renovation in 2010. Below it was a faded sign, in memory of Ethan Monroe. His stomach twisted. This was real. This wasn't just a poster. It was a life, a story, and he might be part of it. Across town, a woman named Diane Foster sat in her dimly lit apartment, her fingers trembling as she sorted through a box of old photos. Diane had been a nurse at St. Agnes in 2007, one of the last to see Ethan before he vanished. She'd left the hospital a year later, haunted by the case, and moved to a neighboring town. But she'd never forgotten Lila's screams, or the way the police had questioned her, as if she'd had something to do with it. Diane hadn't been entirely honest back then. She'd seen something that night, a figure in the parking lot, too far to identify, but she hadn't reported it. She'd been scared, young, afraid of getting involved. Now, 18 years later, guilt gnawed at her. Diane had pinned the poster to the community board. She'd kept the original flyer all these years, updating it with a new sketch she'd paid for out of pocket. She didn't know if it would lead anywhere, but she couldn't keep silent anymore. She owed Lila that much. Sarah Klein spent the night digging through the Ethan Monroe case files, her office lit by a single lamp. The details were as familiar as her own heartbeat. The empty crib, the blue blanket, the useless security footage. But something nagged at her, a name she'd overlooked back then. Diane Foster, a nurse who'd quit shortly after the kidnapping. Sarah had interviewed her, but Diane had been nervous, evasive. At the time, Sarah had chalked it up to shock. Now she wasn't so sure. She pulled up Diane's last known address and made a note to visit her. If someone was putting up posters, they knew something. And Sarah was done letting this case slip through her fingers. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat on his bed, the poster spread out before him, his mind a tangle of questions. Who was Ethan Monroe? Why did his face look like Caleb's? And why did Lila Monroe feel so familiar? He thought of his parents, their secrecy, the locked box in the attic. He needed answers, but he was terrified of what he'd find. The next morning, he went back to the daily grind, hoping to see the librarian who'd mentioned the poster. Ellen was there, sipping tea, her eyes sharp as she watched him. "You're the kid from yesterday," she said, her voice low. "You took that poster down, didn't you?" Caleb froze, his hands clammy. I don't know what you're talking about." Ellen leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw you, and I know who you look like. Be careful, kid. Some secrets are better left buried." Caleb's heart pounded as he backed away, Ellen's words echoing in his head. He didn't know who to trust, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stop now. He had to find Lila Monroe again, and he had to confront his parents. Whatever the truth was, it was unraveling, and Caleb was caught in its threads. Lila sat in her apartment, the blue blanket clutched in her hands. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying the boy's face, his eyes, the way he'd looked at her. She didn't know if she was losing her mind or if fate was finally giving her a chance. When Sarah called to say she was following a lead, Lila felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. But hope was dangerous. It had broken her before, and she wasn't sure she could survive it again. As the sun rose over Havenwood, the town felt smaller, its secrets pressing closer. Caleb, Lila, Sarah, Diane, each was a piece of a puzzle that had been scattered for 18 years. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of a quiet town, and it was only a matter of time before it came to light. The streets of Havenwood were deceptively calm, their quiet facades hiding a town teetering on the edge of truth. For 18 years, the disappearance of Ethan Monroe had been a scar, a whispered tragedy that shaped lives and buried secrets. Now, as autumn leaves skittered across the pavement, those secrets were clawing their way to the surface. Caleb Reed, a boy with a face that matched a missing poster, stood at the heart of it, his world unraveling. Lila Monroe, the mother who'd never stopped searching, felt hope and fear collide. Detective Sarah Klein, haunted by a promise unkept, was closing in on answers. And Diane Foster, a nurse bound by guilt, held a key she'd hidden too long. The truth was coming, but in Havenwood, truth had a price. Caleb's bike wobbled as he pedaled through the pre-dawn mist, the missing poster crumpled in his pocket. Ellen's warning at the daily grind, "Some secrets are better left buried," rang in his ears, but he couldn't stop. The diner was his destination, though he didn't know what he'd say to Lila Monroe. Would he show her the poster? Ask if she thought he was her son? The idea was insane, but the pull was undeniable, like a memory buried in his bones. He parked his bike behind the diner, its neon sign flickering in the gray light, and hesitated. The back door creaked open, and Lila stepped out, a trash bag in hand. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide, the bag slipping from her grip. "You," she whispered, her voice raw. "You're the boy from yesterday." Caleb's mouth went dry. I need to talk to you." Lila's gaze darted to the empty lot, then back to him. "About what?" He pulled the poster from his pocket, unfolding it with trembling hands. "This." Layla's breath hitched as she took it, her fingers brushing the sketch of Ethan's face, her son's face, now mirrored in the boy before her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, her voice steady. "Where did you get this?" "It was on the board at the coffee shop," Caleb said, his words tumbling out. "I saw it, and it looks like me. I don't know why, but I had to find you." Lila's knees buckled, and she leaned against the dumpster for support. "What's your name?" "Caleb. Caleb Reed." The name meant nothing to her, but his eyes, those blue eyes, were Ethan's. She wanted to reach out, to touch his face. But fear stopped her. What if this was a cruel trick, a mirage of hope? "Caleb," she said softly, testing the name. "Who are your parents?" "Margaret and Thomas Reed," he said, his voice tight. "They adopted me. But they never talk about it. I don't even know where I was born." Lila's heart pounded. Adopted. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Do you know when you were born?" "October 10th, 2007, he said, and Lila's world tilted. She covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Ethan's birthday. It could be a coincidence, but her gut screamed otherwise. "Caleb, I need you to come inside. Please." He followed her into the diner's kitchen, the smell of grease and coffee grounding him as his mind spun. Lila locked the door behind them, her hands shaking. "I don't know how to say this," she began, "but 18 years ago my son was taken from the hospital. His name was Ethan. He was born on October 10th, 2007. And you look like him. Caleb's chest tightened. You think I'm him? Asterisk. I don't know, Lila admitted, her voice breaking. But I can't ignore this. I've spent half my life looking for him, and now you're here. And She trailed off, tears streaming down her face. Caleb didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to run, to pretend this wasn't happening. But another part, a deeper part, felt tethered to this woman, to her pain. What do we do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening. We find the truth, but we need help. I know someone, a detective. Her name's Sarah Klein. She's been on Ethan's case since the beginning. Caleb nodded, though fear gnawed at him. Talking to a detective meant opening a door. He might not be able to close. But he was in too deep now. Okay, he said. Call her. Sarah Klein was already on her way to Diane Foster's apartment when her phone rang. Lila's voice was frantic, recounting the encounter with Caleb, the poster, his birth date. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Stay put, she said. I'm coming to you. She hung up and pressed the gas, her mind racing. A boy matching Ethan's description, born the same day, adopted under vague circumstances. It was too much to be coincidence. But Sarah had seen cases collapse under the weight of hope. She needed evidence, not just instinct. Diane Foster was her next step. The former nurse had been a loose end in 2007, and Sarah's gut told her Diane knew more than she'd let on. Diane's apartment was in a rundown complex on the outskirts of Havenwood, its paint peeling, its windows grimy. Sarah knocked, her badge ready, but no one answered. She knocked again, louder, and heard a faint shuffle inside. Diane Foster? It's Detective Sarah Klein, Havenwood PD. Open the door. The lock clicked, and Diane appeared, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was in her late 40s now, her once neat nurse's bun replaced by a messy ponytail. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. I want to talk about Ethan Monroe, Sarah said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was cluttered, boxes stacked against the walls, photos scattered on a coffee table. Someone put up a poster with his name. A new sketch. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Diane's hands twisted together, her gaze darting to the photos. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me, Diane. You were a nurse at St. Agnes when Ethan was taken. You quit a year. Later, moved out of town. And now a poster shows up 18 years later? I'm not buying it. Diane sank onto the couch, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I couldn't keep it in anymore. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low but firm. What did you see that night, Diane? Tell me now, or I'll haul you in for obstruction. Diane's sobs broke free, her words spilling out in a rush. I saw someone in the parking lot, okay? That night, after my shift. It was dark, but I saw them a woman, I think holding something. A baby, maybe. I didn't know it was Ethan. Not then. I was scared, so I didn't say anything. But I've carried it ever since. Sarah's pulse quickened. A woman? Did you recognize her? Diane shook her head. It was too dark. But she was tall, thin. She got into a car, a blue sedan, I think. I didn't get the plates. Sarah jotted it down, her mind flashing to the 2007 case files. A blue sedan had been mentioned by a janitor, but it was dismissed as unrelated. Why didn't you tell us then? She asked, her voice sharp. I was young, Diane said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to get involved. I thought it wasn't my business. But I was wrong. I've been wrong for 18 years. Sarah's jaw tightened. And the poster? Diane looked away. Guilt etched into her face. I kept the original flyer. Last year, I paid for a new sketch, what Ethan might look like now. I put it up. At the daily grind, I thought, maybe someone would recognize him. Maybe I could make it right. Sarah stood, her mind a whirlwind. Diane's story was a lead, but it was 18 years late. Still, it was something. You're coming with me, she said. We're going to the station, and you're giving a full statement. Diane nodded, her fight gone, and followed Sarah out. As they drove, Sarah's phone buzzed again Lila, saying Caleb was with her at the diner. Sarah's heart raced. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still blurry. At the Reed house, Margaret Reed was pacing the kitchen, her nails bitten to the quick. Thomas was at the garage, oblivious, but Margaret's world was crumbling. Caleb had been acting strange for days, sneaking out, avoiding her questions. His eyes guarded. She'd seen the poster at the coffee shop before she tore it down, and it had nearly stopped her heart. Ethan Monroe's face, older now, was Caleb's. She'd always known this day might come, but she'd prayed it wouldn't. Margaret had been 32 in 2007, a nurse at St. Agnes, married to Thomas, but unable to have children. The loss had broken her, turned her into someone desperate, someone capable of crossing lines she'd never imagined. She'd been on duty the night Ethan was taken, and though she hadn't planned it, the moment had presented itself a baby. Alone, a mother asleep, a chance to fill the void in her life. She'd acted without thinking, slipping Ethan out in her arms, her nurse's uniform a shield against suspicion. She'd driven to a motel, then to a contact who forged papers, creating. Caleb Reed. Thomas had never asked questions. He'd accepted the boy as theirs, grateful for the silence. But now, Caleb was asking questions, and Margaret was terrified. She went to the attic, pulling out the locked box she'd hidden for years. Inside was Ethan's hospital bracelet, a tiny band with his name, and a photo she'd taken that night, his blue eyes staring up at her. She'd kept them as proof, as penance, a reminder of what she'd done. Now they felt like a noose. She stuffed the box under her arm and went to the garage, where Thomas was tinkering with an old carburetor. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Thomas looked up, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" "Caleb," she said, her voice breaking. "He's asking about his adoption. I think he knows." Thomas's face darkened. "Knows what, Margaret?" "We agreed never to talk about it." "He saw a poster," she said, tears spilling over. "Ethan Monroe. It looks like him, Thomas. Someone's digging, and I don't know what to do." Thomas stood, wiping his hands on a rag, his jaw tight. "We did what we did. He's our son now. No one's taking him." Margaret shook her head, panic rising. "It's not that simple. If he finds out, if the police, then we stop it," Thomas said, his voice cold. "Whatever it takes." Margaret stared at him, fear twisting in her gut. She'd crossed a line 18 years ago, but Thomas's words suggested anew. One she wasn't know if she could follow Dot at the diner. Lila and Caleb sat in a booth, waiting for Sarah. The morning rush had picked up, but Lila had called in sick, unable to focus. Caleb was quiet, his hands, his eyes darting to the door. "What if she doesn't believe us?" he asked. "She will," Lila said, though doubt gnawed at her. "Sarah's the only one who's never given up on Ethan." Caleb studied her, the weight of her words settling over him. "What was he like?" "Ethan, I mean." Lila's smile was sad but warm, her eyes distant. "He was only 2 days old, so I didn't know yet much. But long he had these eyes, your eyes, blue, like he'd seen the stars. He'd grab my finger, hold on like he knew me. I'd sing to him, This old lullaby my mom used to sing. He'd go quiet, just listening, like he understood it. Caleb's chest ached, a memory flickering a woman's voice, soft, singing something he couldn't place. What lullaby? He asked, his voice hoarse. Lila hummed softly, her voice trembling. Hush now, my baby. Be still, love. Don't cry. Don't cry. She stopped, tears falling, her eyes locked on his. Caleb's breath caught. He knew it. The melody was faint, buried deep, but it was there, like a thread tying him to her. I've heard that before, he whispered, his eyes wide. I don't know how, but I have. Before Lila could respond, the door swung open, and Sarah walked in, her face grim. She slid into the booth beside, her eyes scanning Caleb with an intensity that made him squirm. You're Caleb Reed, she said, her voice calm but probing. Leela tells me you found a poster. Caleb nodded, sliding it across the table. Sarah studied it, her jaw tightening. You know what this means, don't you? I don't know anything, Caleb said, his voice defensive. I don't know who I am anymore. Sarah leaned back, her mind racing. She'd seen the sketch, and the resemblance was uncanny, but she needed more than a face, more than a birth date. Caleb, I'm going to need you to do something for me, okay? A DNA test. It's quick, just a swab. It'll tell us if you're related to Lila. Caleb's eyes widened, fear flashing in them. A cross. What if I don't want it? Then we keep looking, Sarah said, her voice firm but kind. But if you're Ethan, this is the only way to know for sure. Leela reached out, squeezing. For his hand. Please, Caleb, she said softly, her voice breaking. I've waited 18 years for you. I can't lose you again. Caleb looked at her, her eyes pleading, and something inside him broke. Okay, he said finally, his voice barely audible. I'll do it, Sarah nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Good. I'll arrange it for this afternoon. But Caleb, I need you to tell me about your parents. Everything you know about. Your adoption, about them. Caleb hesitated, his loyalty to Margaret and Thomas clashing with his need for answers. They don't talk about it, he said. They've always said I was theirs, but I've never seen papers, nothing real. There's this other box in the attic, though locked. I tried to open it once, but Mom caught me. She got mad, real mad. Sarah's pen paused, her instincts flaring. A locked box? That was a red flag. Do you think you could get into it? She asked. Caleb swallowed, his throat tight. I don't know. They're home a lot now, and I've been acting weird. They're watching me. Sarah exchanged a glance with Lila, her mind turning to Margaret Reed. She'd interviewed Margaret in 2007, a nurse at St. Agnes, composed and cooperative. But Diane's story, a woman in the parking lot, a blue sedan nagged at her. The Reed owned a car back then, a blue Ford Escort. It wasn't enough for a warrant, but it was enough to dig deeper. Caleb, she said carefully, I need you to stay with Lila for now. Don't go home until I say so. It's not safe until we know. More. Caleb's eyes widened. Not safe? They're my parents. I know. Sarah cut him off, her voice gentle but firm. But we don't know what they know, or what they've done. Trust me, okay? Caleb nodded reluctantly, his world tilting further. Leela squeezed his hand, her touch grounding him, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of belonging, even amidst the chaos. Asterisk Margaret Reed was unraveling. She'd burned the photo from the box, the hospital bracelet tucked into her pocket, but the guilt was suffocating. Thomas's plan, whatever it takes, scared her more than the truth. She'd stolen a child, yes, but she'd loved him. Caleb was her son, her everything. She couldn't lose him, not now. When Caleb didn't come home that afternoon, Margaret's panic spiked. She called his phone. but it went to voicemail. She drove to the daily grind, but he wasn't there. The barista, a kid named Jake, said he'd seen Caleb talking to Ellen earlier, looking spooked. Margaret's heart sank. Ellen, the librarian, had always been nosy, always digging into Havenwood's past. If she'd seen the poster, if she'd talked to Caleb, Margaret drove to the library, her hands gripping the wheel. Ellen was at the desk, her glasses perched on her nose, her face neutral as Margaret approached. "Where's Caleb?" Margaret demanded, her voice sharp. Ellen's eyes narrowed, her voice calm but cutting. "I don't know, Margaret, but I know you've been lying about that boy for years. Ethan Monroe's face is on a poster, and it's Caleb's. You think no one would notice?" Margaret's blood ran cold. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, but her voice trembled. Ellen leaned forward, her voice low. "I was a volunteer at St. Agnes in '07. I saw you that night, Margaret, leaving with a bundle in your arms." "I didn't." "Say anything then, but I'm saying it now. You can't run from this." Margaret backed away, her vision blurring. She stumbled out of the library, her breath coming in gasps. Ellen knew. Caleb was gone. The police would come. She drove home, her mind a storm, and found Thomas waiting, his face grim. "He's not here," Thomas said. "Where is he?" Margaret broke, sobbing as she told him about Ellen, about the poster, about Caleb's absence. Thomas's face hardened. "We need to leave," he said. "Pack a bag. We'll find him, and we'll go." Margaret shook her head, tears streaming. "We can't, Thomas. It's over. They'll find us." Thomas grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "He's our son. We don't give up." Margaret nodded, numb, but as she packed, she slipped the hospital bracelet into a drawer, a silent confession. She'd follow Thomas, but she knew the truth would catch them. Sarah arranged the DNA test at a clinic, Caleb's swab taken under Lila's watchful eye. The results would take 24 hours, an eternity in their fractured world. Sarah drove them to Lila's apartment, a small space filled with faded photos and Ethan's blanket, folded neatly on a shelf. Caleb stared at it, a memory tugging a blue blanket, soft against his cheek. "You okay?" Lila asked, her voice soft. Caleb shook his head, his voice raw. "I don't know who I am. If I'm Ethan, then everything's a lie. My parents, my life." Lila sat beside him, her hand resting near his, not touching but close. "If you're Ethan," she said, "you're still you. Nothing changes that. And if you're not, I'm still glad you're here." Caleb's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he felt seen, not as a mystery, but as himself. He wanted to believe her, but fear lingered. What if the truth destroyed everything? Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from her partner, Officer Reyes. Diane's statement was filed, and a search of old records confirmed Margaret Reed owned a blue sedan in 2007. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough for a warrant to search the Reed house. Sarah excused herself, stepping outside to call the judge. "We need to move fast," she told Reyes. "If Margaret's involved, she might run." That night, Havenwood buzzed with whispers. Ellen had told a friend about Margaret, and the friend told another, the rumor spreading like wildfire. By morning, the town was alive with speculation. Margaret Reed, the quiet nurse, a kidnapper? Caleb, her son, the missing Ethan Monroe? The diner was packed, locals trading theories. Lila's absence noted but unexplained. Sarah executed the warrant at dawn, her team surrounding the Reed house. Thomas opened the door, his face a mask of defiance. "What's this about?" he demanded. "Where's Margaret?" Sarah asked, her voice cold. Thomas's eyes flickered, but before he could answer, Margaret appeared, her face pale, her hands trembling. I'm here, she said, her voice barely audible. Sarah read her rights, her team searching the house. In a drawer, they found Ethan's hospital bracelet, its faded ink a silent scream. Margaret's knees buckled, and Thomas caught her, his face crumpling. We loved him, Margaret sobbed. He was ours. Sarah's heart twisted, but her voice was steady. You stole him, she said. You stole a child, a mother's life. They were cuffed and led to the squad car. Neighbors watching, the town's illusion of peace shattered. Sarah found the locked box in the attic, its contents burned, but the bracelet was enough. Margaret's confession came at the station, a flood of guilt and grief. She'd taken Ethan, unable to bear her own emptiness, and raised him as Caleb, convincing herself it was right. Thomas had known, but stayed silent. Complicit in her crime, the DNA results came at noon, Sarah delivering them to Lila's apartment. Caleb sat beside Lila, their hands inches apart, the tension suffocating. Sarah opened the envelope, her voice steady. Caleb, you're Ethan Monroe. The match is 99.9%. Lila's sob broke the silence, her arms wrapping around Caleb, her tears soaking his shirt. Caleb Ethan froze, then slowly hugged her back, his own tears falling. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he didn't know why. You're home, Lila said, her voice fierce. You're home. Sarah watched, her own eyes wet. She'd kept her promise, but the cost was heavy. Margaret and Thomas faced charges, their lives destroyed. Caleb Ethan faced a new life, his identity a bridge between two worlds. In the weeks that followed, Havenwood grappled with its truth. Margaret and Thomas were convicted, their sentences long, but tempered by their remorse. Diane Foster testified, her guilt eased by her role in the resolution. Ellen became a local legend, her nosiness redeemed. Ethan, still Caleb to himself, stayed with Lila, navigating their new bond. She sang him the lullaby, and he remembered more, fragments of a life stolen but reclaimed. He visited St. Agnes, the plaque for Ethan Monroe, now a marker of survival, not loss. Sarah retired, her final case closed, her nights finally restful. Havenwood, healed, its secrets laid bare, its people bound by a story of loss and redemption. Ethan and Lila walked its streets, mother and son, their hands clasped, their future uncertain, but theirs to write. The blue blanket stayed on the shelf, a relic of pain, but also of love, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, light could find a way.